I adjusted my monitor for the third time that morning, trying to find the perfect angle to avoid the glare from the fluorescent lights overhead. At 26, I'd been data flow analytics lead machine learning engineer for 2 years, but my workspace still consisted of a wobbly desk in the corner of the open floor plan, wedged between the printer and the emergency exit. My name is Amelia Chen, and I'd like to say I was living my dream, but the reality was more complicated than that. I loved the work, building predictive models, optimizing algorithms, diving deep into data patterns that others couldn't see. What I didn't love was watching my male colleagues get promoted while I remained stuck in the same position, doing increasingly complex work for the same salary I'd started with. "Morning, Amelia," called out Tom from the coffee station. He was one of the newer hires, brought in 6 months ago with a title of senior data scientist, and a salary that I'd accidentally glimpsed on a carelessly placed HR document, $30,000 more than mine, despite having half my experience. "Morning," I replied, not looking up from my screen where I was debugging the recommendation engine that had become Dataflow's flagship product. The algorithm I designed from scratch was now generating 80% of the company's revenue, processing millions of user interactions daily and delivering personalized content that kept engagement rates consistently above industry averages. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, annual review, 2 p.m., conference room B. I'd been looking forward to this meeting for weeks. My performance metrics were flawless, my projects had exceeded every benchmark, and I'd documented my contributions meticulously. This was finally going to be the conversation where I got the recognition and compensation I deserved. I spent my lunch break preparing a presentation that outlined my achievements, the 40% improvement in prediction accuracy I'd achieved, the $2.3 million in additional revenue my optimizations had generated, and the 3 patent applications filed based on my innovations. I'd also researched industry salary standards and prepared a case for bringing my compensation in line with market rates. Walking into conference room B that afternoon, I felt confident. My direct manager, Patricia, was already seated across from CEO David Reeves, a man in his 50s who'd built Dataflow from a small startup into a mid-sized analytics firm. Both had copies of my performance review in front of them. "Amelia, thanks for joining us," David said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Let's dive right in. Patricia has nothing but good things to say about your technical contributions this year." I smiled and opened my laptop. "Thank you. I've prepared some metrics that I think demonstrate the value I've brought to the company, and I'd like to discuss my compensation package." David and Patricia exchanged a glance that made my stomach tighten slightly, but I pressed on. "Based on my research, senior machine learning engineers in Seattle are earning between $140,000 and $180,000 annually. My current salary of $95,000 is significantly below market rate, especially considering my track record and the revenue impact of my work." I clicked to my first slide, showing the performance improvements of the recommendation engine. The algorithm I designed has increased user engagement by 40% and directly contributed to $2.3 million in additional revenue this fiscal year. I've also filed 3 provisional patents on behalf of the company, and my optimizations have reduced server costs by 25%. David nodded politely, but his expression remained neutral. "Those are impressive numbers, Amelia. Your technical skills are definitely an asset to the team." I felt encouraged and continued with my presentation, walking through each major contribution and its business impact. When I finished, I looked expectantly at David and Patricia. "So," I said, "I'm hoping we can discuss adjusting my compensation to reflect my contributions and bring it in line with industry standards. I'm thinking somewhere in the $140,000 range would be appropriate." The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. David leaned back in his chair. "Amelia, I appreciate your thoroughness, and like I said, your technical work is solid. But I have to be honest with you, we can't justify that kind of salary increase right now." My confidence started to crack. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" "Look," David continued, "you're good at what you do, but the market for your skills is becoming saturated. There are plenty of data science bootcamp graduates who can do similar work for much less. We have to think about the bottom line." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "Bootcamp graduates?" "David, I have a master's degree in computer science from Carnegie Mellon. I've built systems that are generating millions in revenue. This isn't entry-level work." Patricia spoke up for the first time. "Amelia, We value your contributions, but we also have to be realistic about budget constraints. The best we can do is a 3% cost of living adjustment. 3%. On my $95,000 salary, that would be less than $3,000 annually. I stared at them, processing the magnitude of what I was hearing. You're offering me $2,850 more per year for work that's generated $2.3 million in additional revenue? David's tone became slightly defensive. That's not really how compensation works, Amelia. Your salary reflects your role, not the specific revenue attribution of your projects. But Tom, who was hired 6 months ago, started at $125,000 for a senior position. How is that justified? Another uncomfortable silence. Patricia cleared her throat. Amelia, we can't discuss other employees' compensation packages. That's confidential information. I felt something inside me snap. It's confidential, but it's not a secret that men in this company are consistently paid more for the same work. I've been here longer, I have more experience, and I've delivered better results than anyone else on the team. David's expression hardened. Amelia, I understand you're disappointed, but accusations like that aren't productive. We've made you a fair offer based on your current role and responsibilities. Fair. I laughed bitterly. There's nothing fair about this. Look, David said, his voice taking on a dismissive tone, if you're not happy with the offer, you're free to explore other opportunities. But this is what we can provide right now. I closed my laptop and stood up. I'll definitely be exploring other opportunities. As I walked toward the door, David called after me. Amelia, don't let emotions cloud your judgment. You have a good thing here. Sometimes it's better to be grateful for what you have than to chase unrealistic expectations. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. Unrealistic expectations? Like expecting to be paid fairly for my work. Like expecting to be paid like a senior engineer when you're in a junior role. I turned back to face him. Junior role? I designed the core algorithm that runs your entire business. David shrugged. Algorithms can be rewritten. People are replaceable. Those words echoed in my head as I walked back to my desk. People are replaceable. We'd see about that. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a different mindset. Instead of the eager enthusiasm I'd brought to work for the past 2 years, I felt a cold, calculating focus. David's words kept replaying in my mind. Algorithms can be rewritten. People are replaceable. I spent my first hour reviewing my employment contract, particularly the sections about intellectual property and non-compete clauses. The good news was that my non-compete was limited to direct competitors and had a narrow definition of restricted activities. The better news was that I'd been smart enough to document my work extensively, keeping detailed notes about my thought processes and the evolution of my algorithms. Around 10 a.m., I got a Slack message from Tom. Hey, heard you had your review yesterday. How'd it go? I typed back, got the recognition I deserved, which was technically true, just not in the way he'd interpret it. Over the next few days, I began implementing a careful plan. I started by quietly backing up all of my personal notes and documentation onto my personal devices. I was careful to only take materials I'd created independently and anything that wasn't explicitly company confidential. I also began reaching out to my network, scheduling coffee meetings with former colleagues and industry contacts. My second step was to begin documenting the current state of all my projects. I created detailed handover documents for each system I'd built, noting the technical specifications, performance metrics, and known issues. To anyone observing, it would look like I was being thorough and professional. In reality, I was preparing for my departure while creating a paper trail of my indispensability. The third step was the most important. I began identifying the critical knowledge that existed only in my head. The recommendation engine I'd built was complex, with dozens of interconnected components and optimization tricks that I'd never fully documented. The code was well commented, but understanding the underlying logic and being able to maintain or improve it were different things entirely. I also started noticing things I'd previously overlooked. Like how Patricia consistently took credit for my innovations in management meetings, or how David would casually mention our algorithm when talking to clients, never acknowledging that it was the work of a single person. The more I paid attention, the more I realized how undervalued I'd been. 2 weeks after my review, I got an unexpected email from a recruiter. "Hi Amelia, I came across your profile and was impressed by your background. I'm working with a Series B startup that's looking for a VP of engineering to build their ML infrastructure from the ground up. The compensation package is $180,000 base plus equity. Would you be interested in learning more?" I stared at the email for a long moment. VP of engineering. $180,000 base. Equity. Everything I'd asked for at Dataflow, but at a company that actually valued talent. I typed back, "I'd be very interested in learning more." The next day, I had a phone screening with the startup CEO. The company was called Nexus Analytics, and they were building predictive models for e-commerce personalization, similar to what I'd been doing at Dataflow, but with better funding and a more ambitious vision. "We're looking for someone who can architect our entire ML platform," the CEO explained. "Someone who understands both the technical implementation and the business impact. Based on your background, you seem like exactly what we need." The interview process moved quickly. Within a week, I'd had 3 technical interviews, a culture fit conversation, and a final discussion with their founding team. Every conversation reinforced my growing excitement about the opportunity. Meanwhile, at Dataflow, I maintained my professional demeanor while quietly preparing for my transition. I continued working on my assigned projects, but I stopped going above and beyond. I stopped working late nights to optimize performance. I stopped proactively identifying and fixing potential issues. Most importantly, I stopped sharing my institutional knowledge. When Tom asked me about the specifics of how the recommendation engine handled edge cases, I gave him the documentation and suggested he figure it out himself. When Patricia wanted me to explain the business logic behind certain algorithmic decisions, I pointed her to my technical specifications. "You seem distracted lately," Patricia mentioned during our weekly one-on-one. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I replied. "Just focusing on my assigned tasks." She looked confused. "Your assigned tasks? Amelia, you usually take initiative on optimization projects and system improvements." "I'm just being more mindful of scope," I said. "Don't want to chase unrealistic expectations." I could see her trying to process the subtle dig, but she didn't press the issue. 3 weeks after my performance review, I got the call I'd been waiting for. "Amelia, this is Jennifer from Nexus Analytics. I'm pleased to offer you the VP of engineering position. The package is $180,000 base salary, plus equity, plus a $25,000 signing bonus. We'd love to have you start as soon as possible." I accepted on the spot. Now came the fun part. I scheduled a meeting with David for the following Monday morning. When I walked into his office, he was reviewing quarterly reports and looked up with mild annoyance at the interruption. "What can I do for you, Amelia?" I placed a printed letter on his desk. "I'm submitting my 2 weeks' notice." David's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise to something approaching panic. He picked up the letter and scanned it quickly. "You're leaving? Where are you going?" "I've accepted a VP of engineering position at another company." "VP of engineering?" David's voice rose slightly. "Amelia, that's a significant jump from your current role. Are you sure you're ready for that level of responsibility?" I almost laughed. "I'm confident in my abilities." David set down the letter and leaned back in his chair. "Look, if this is about the salary discussion, maybe we can revisit that." I might have been hasty in my response. "It's not just about salary, David. It's about respect and recognition. You made it clear that you see me as replaceable." "I never said that. You said algorithms can be rewritten and people are replaceable. That was your exact quote." David shifted uncomfortably. "I may have been blunt in my delivery, but we value your contributions here. What would it take to keep you?" I'd been expecting this question. The position I'm taking offers $180,000 base salary plus equity and a signing bonus. The title is VP of Engineering, with full ownership of the ML platform. If Dataflow wants to counter, that's the bar. David's face went pale. "Amelia, be reasonable. We're not Google or Facebook. We can't match that kind of compensation." "Then you can't match the offer," I said simply. "What about loyalty? You've been here for 2 years. We gave you your start in the industry." And I've generated millions in revenue for the company. I'd say we're even. David tried several more approaches over the next few minutes, appealing to my sense of team responsibility, warning me about the risks of joining a startup, suggesting that I was making an emotional decision. I listened politely and maintained my professional demeanor. Finally, he asked the question I'd been waiting for: what's the transition plan for your projects? I've created comprehensive documentation for all my current work. The handover documents are in the shared drive, organized by project priority. And the recommendation engine? Fully documented. The code is well commented, and I've included architectural diagrams and performance benchmarks. David looked relieved. Good. That's our core product. We can't afford any disruption. Of course not. What I didn't mention was that my documentation covered the current state of the system, not the tribal knowledge required to maintain and improve it. I documented what the algorithm did, not necessarily why it worked or how to troubleshoot issues that hadn't occurred yet. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted handover meetings with Tom and the other developers who would be taking over my projects. I walked them through the code, explained the basic architecture, and answered their questions professionally. But I didn't volunteer the deeper insights that came from having built the system from the ground up. When Tom asked about performance optimization strategies, I showed him the current configurations and suggested he could experiment with different approaches. When he asked about handling unusual data patterns, I pointed him to the error logs and said he'd learn by experience. This is pretty complex, Tom said during one of our sessions. How long did it take you to build this? About 18 months from conception to production, I replied. But it's all documented now. Right, but there's a lot of nuance here. Like, how do you know when to adjust these parameters? Experience, I said. You'll develop that intuition over time. Tom looked concerned. Amelia, what if something breaks after you leave? What if we run into issues we can't solve? Then you'll figure it out. David said algorithms can be rewritten, right? My last day at Dataflow was a Friday. I cleaned out my desk, returned my company laptop, and said goodbye to my colleagues. Patricia gave me a card signed by the team, and David shook my hand and wished me luck. Keep in touch, David said. And if things don't work out at your new company, you know where to find us. I smiled politely. I'll keep that in mind. As I walked to my car, I felt a mixture of excitement and anticipation. The next chapter of my career was about to begin, and I had a feeling David would be hearing from me sooner than he expected. My first week at Nexus Analytics was everything I'd hoped for and more. I had a real office with a window, a budget for hiring my own team, and leadership that actually listened to my technical recommendations. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and I felt energized in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I'd almost forgotten about Dataflow entirely when my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. The caller ID showed Patricia's name. Amelia, hi. I hope you're settling in well at your new company. Hi Patricia. Yes, things are going great. What can I do for you? Well, we're having a small issue with the recommendation engine, and I was hoping you might have a few minutes to help us troubleshoot it. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of issue? The click-through rates have dropped about 15% since last week, and Tom can't figure out why. The code looks fine to him, but something's definitely off. I pulled up my personal notes on my laptop. Based on what Patricia was describing, it sounded like the model had started overfitting to recent data patterns, which was a common issue that required periodic retraining with adjusted parameters. Has Tom checked the model performance metrics over the past month? He says the training accuracy looks normal, but the real-world performance is declining. Classic overfitting. I'd built safeguards into the system to prevent this, but they required manual intervention when certain thresholds were crossed. Patricia, this sounds like a technical issue that Tom should be able to handle. I'm not really available for consulting right now. Amelia, please. I know you're busy, but this is hurting our revenue. Could you just take a quick look? We could compensate you for your time. I considered the request. It would take me about 10 minutes to identify the problem and maybe another hour to write up the solution. But I also remembered David's words about people being replaceable. I'm sorry, Patricia, but I'm not available. Tom has all the documentation he needs to troubleshoot the issue. But Amelia, you built this system. You understand it better than anyone. Then maybe you should have considered that before deciding I was too expensive. There was a long pause. Amelia, I understand you're upset about the salary situation, but this is bigger than that. We're losing money every day this isn't fixed. I wish you the best of luck resolving it. I hung up the phone and went back to work on my new projects. I had a talented team to hire and a cutting-edge platform to build. Data flow's problems were no longer my concern. The next week, I got another call, this time from David directly. Amelia, I need to speak with you about the recommendation engine. We're having serious performance issues. Patricia mentioned something about that. Did Tom not figure it out? No, he didn't. And it's gotten worse. Click-through rates are down 25% now, and our biggest client is threatening to leave if we don't resolve it. I felt a small surge of satisfaction. That's unfortunate. Amelia, I'll cut to the chase. We need you to consult with us on fixing this issue. We'll pay your consulting rate, whatever that is. I'm not really taking on consulting work right now, David. I'm focused on my new role. Name your price. I paused, considering. My consulting rate is $300 per hour, with a minimum 10-hour engagement. Done. Can you start this week? I'll have to check my schedule. The truth was, I could have fixed data flow's problem in a couple of hours of remote work. But I was curious to see how far they'd let things deteriorate before admitting they needed me. Actually, David, I've reconsidered. I'm too busy with my current responsibilities to take on outside consulting. But I'm sure Tom will figure it out eventually. Amelia, be reasonable. You built this system. You know how to fix it. I built it when I was a junior engineer, making $95,000 a year. The knowledge required to maintain it is apparently worth VP-level compensation. David's voice took on an edge of desperation. What do you want? More money? A title? We can work something out. I want you to remember this conversation the next time you tell someone that people are replaceable. I hung up and muted David's number. Whatever happened next at Dataflow was their problem to solve. 3 weeks later, I was having lunch with my former colleague Emma, who'd left Dataflow 6 months before me to join a larger tech company. She reached out wanting to catch up and hear about my new role. I heard through the grapevine that Dataflow is having some serious issues, Emma said over coffee. Something about their main product being broken? I tried to keep my expression neutral. I wouldn't know. I've been focused on my new position. Right, but didn't you build their recommendation system? The one that's apparently causing all the problems. I took a sip of my latte. I built the initial version, yes. But I left comprehensive documentation when I departed. Emma leaned forward conspiratorially. Word is that they've lost 2 major clients already, and David is scrambling to find someone who can fix it. Apparently, they've brought in 3 different consultants, but none of them have been able to resolve the core issues. This was news to me. I'd expected some short-term problems, but losing clients was a more serious consequence than I'd anticipated. Tom couldn't figure it out? Tom quit 2 weeks ago. Apparently, David was putting insane pressure on him to fix the algorithm, and he couldn't handle it. He's working at Amazon now. I felt a pang of sympathy for Tom. He'd been caught in the middle of a situation that wasn't his fault. Who's handling the technical side now? They hired some contractor from India who's supposedly an expert in machine learning. But from what I hear, he's basically starting from scratch because he can't understand your original architecture. Emma pulled out her phone and showed me a LinkedIn post. Look at this. The post was from a Dataflow client I recognized, a mid-sized e-commerce company that had been one of their long-time customers. The post read, "After 18 months of excellent service, we've decided to part ways with Dataflow Analytics due to recent performance issues with their recommendation platform. We're grateful for the partnership, but need to prioritize our customer experience." Ouch, I said. Yeah, and apparently that's not the only one. David's been calling everyone he knows, trying to find someone who can reverse engineer your work. I felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction at being vindicated, but also some guilt about the collateral damage. The other employees at Dataflow hadn't been part of the decision to undervalue me, but they were bearing the consequences. Emma, hypothetically, how bad is it? Hypothetically? I heard from someone who knows someone in their accounting department that they're looking at a potential 40% revenue decline this quarter. David's been asking investors for emergency funding, and there's talk about layoffs. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Amelia, this is David. I know you blocked my calls, but I'm begging you to reconsider. We'll match your new salary, give you equity, whatever it takes. Please call me. I showed Emma the message. She whistled low. Wow, he's really desperate. Apparently. Are you going to help them? I thought about the question seriously. Part of me felt bad for my former colleagues who were suffering because of decisions they hadn't made. But another part of me remembered David's dismissive attitude, his refusal to pay me fairly, and his assertion that I was replaceable. I don't think so, I said finally. I warned them about the risks of undervaluing their technical talent. This is a natural consequence of that decision. Emma nodded approvingly. Good for you. You don't owe them anything. That evening, I did some research on Dataflow's current situation. A quick Google search revealed that their stock price had dropped 30% in the past month, and there were rumors of acquisition talks with a larger competitor. Several tech blogs had picked up the story of their technical difficulties, and the narrative was becoming public. One article particularly caught my attention. Dataflow Analytics learns hard lesson about talent retention. The piece detailed how the company had lost its lead engineer and was now struggling to maintain its core product. While it didn't mention me by name, the implications were clear. I forwarded the article to my team at Nexus Analytics with a note, interesting case study about the importance of retaining technical talent. Something to keep in mind as we build our culture. My CEO responded within minutes, absolutely. This is exactly why we're committed to competitive compensation and growth opportunities. Thanks for sharing. The contrast couldn't have been starker. At Nexus, I was valued, respected, and compensated fairly. At Dataflow, I'd been treated as a replaceable resource right up until the moment they realized I wasn't. That night, I got another text from David. Amelia, I understand you're angry, but please don't let pride destroy both our companies. We can work together to find a solution. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. David, this isn't about pride. It's about consequences. You made a business decision about my value to the company. Now you're experiencing the results of that decision. His response came immediately. I was wrong. I admit it. I was completely wrong about your value and your contributions. Please give me a chance to make this right. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I'm not available for consulting. I'd recommend focusing on rebuilding your technical team with people who understand the system requirements. I didn't hear back from David after that. But I did hear from Patricia a few days later. Amelia, I know you're done with Dataflow, but I wanted you to know that I'm resigning. I can't be part of this dysfunction anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, Patricia. What are you going to do? I'm taking some time to reassess my career priorities. But I wanted to apologize for how we handled your situation. You deserved better, and I should have advocated for you more strongly. Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. I appreciate that, Patricia. And I'm sorry you're caught up in this mess. It's not your fault, Amelia. You tried to warn us, but we didn't listen. Now we're paying the price. After hanging up, I reflected on the conversation. Patricia was right, I had tried to warn them. I'd made a compelling case for my value, backed up with data and market research. They'd chosen to ignore it, and now they were dealing with the consequences. But I also realized that my story was about more than just revenge or proving a point. It was about understanding my own worth and refusing to accept less than I deserved. David's desperation didn't change the fact that I'd found a better opportunity with people who valued my contributions from day one. 6 months after leaving Dataflow, I was thriving at Nexus Analytics. I'd built a team of 8 talented engineers, and we'd launched 3 major product features that had significantly increased our client retention rates. The company had just closed a Series C funding round, and my equity stake was already worth more than I'd made in my entire time at Dataflow. I was reviewing architectural plans for our next-generation platform when my assistant knocked on my office door. Amelia, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's from Dataflow Analytics. I looked up, surprised. Did he say what he wanted? He mentioned something about a business proposal. I was curious enough to agree to the meeting. 5 minutes later, a man in his 30s walked into my office, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expensive suit. Ms. Chen, thank you for seeing me. I'm Richard Park, the new CEO of Dataflow Analytics. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. New CEO? What happened to David? David stepped down 3 months ago. The board felt a leadership change was necessary given the company's recent challenges. I nodded, maintaining a professional demeanor. I see. What can I do for you, Richard? I'll be direct. Dataflow is in trouble, and it's largely due to the loss of institutional knowledge when you left. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to rebuild the recommendation engine, but nothing has matched the performance of your original system. I'm sorry to hear that. We've lost 60% of our clients and had to lay off half our staff. We're looking at potential bankruptcy if we can't turn things around in the next quarter. I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because it proved my value, sadness because good people had lost their jobs. Richard, I appreciate you coming to see me, but I'm not available for consulting. I'm fully committed to my role here at Nexus. I'm not here to offer you consulting work, Ms. Chen. I'm here to offer you an acquisition deal. I raised an eyebrow. Acquisition. Dataflow still has valuable client relationships and a strong brand in the market. What we lack is the technical expertise to rebuild our core platform. Nexus has the talent and the technology we need. Richard opened his portfolio and pulled out a document. We're proposing that Nexus acquire Dataflow's client base and intellectual property. In exchange, we'd offer a significant cash payment plus equity in the combined entity. I skimmed the proposal. The numbers were substantial. Dataflow was essentially offering to pay Nexus to take over their clients and shut down their technical operations. This is interesting, Richard, but I'm not the decision maker for acquisition discussions. You'd need to speak with our CEO and board of directors. I understand. But I wanted to speak with you first because you understand both companies. You know Dataflow's clients and their needs. You'd be the natural choice to lead the integration. I set down the document. Richard, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you review the circumstances of my departure from Dataflow? Richard shifted uncomfortably. I've read the files, yes. Then you know that I asked for fair compensation and was told I was replaceable. The algorithm that Dataflow is now struggling to rebuild, I offered to maintain and improve it for a salary that was below market rate. David refused. I know. And that was a mistake, a critical business error that has cost the company dearly. So now, 6 months later, Dataflow wants to essentially sell itself to my current company, with me leading the integration of the clients I originally brought in? That's an accurate summary, yes. I leaned back in my chair. Richard, I don't bear any ill will toward Dataflow or its employees. But there's something poetic about this situation that I can't ignore. I understand your perspective, and I want to be clear, this proposal recognizes your value and contributions. If the acquisition goes through, you'd receive a substantial bonus for leading the integration, plus equity in the combined company. I appreciate that. But I think the more interesting question is, what would have happened if Dataflow had simply agreed to pay me $140,000 a year? Richard was quiet for a moment. The company would probably still be profitable and growing. Instead, you're looking at bankruptcy and trying to sell your assets to survive. Yes. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Richard, I'll forward your proposal to our executive team. But I want you to understand something. This isn't just about money or revenge. It's about the fundamental principle of valuing talent appropriately. I understand. When companies treat their best people as disposable, they create existential risks for their business. Dataflow isn't failing because of market conditions or competition. It's failing because leadership made a strategic error in talent management. Richard nodded. You're absolutely right. And I hope we can work together to ensure that doesn't happen again. After Richard left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. The proposal was actually quite attractive from a business perspective. Nexus would acquire an established client base and eliminate a competitor, while I'd get to work with clients I already knew and trusted. But more than that, it represented a complete vindication of my value. David had told me I was replaceable, that algorithms could be rewritten. Instead, Dataflow had spent 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to replace me, failed, and was now essentially offering to pay my new company to take over their business. I forwarded Richard's proposal to our CEO with a note: "This is an interesting opportunity. The client relationships are solid, and the technical integration would be straightforward. Worth exploring." The acquisition discussions took 2 months, but eventually, Nexus agreed to purchase Dataflow's client base and key intellectual property. I was promoted to Chief Technology Officer and given responsibility for integrating the clients and rebuilding the platform. On my first day in the new role, I got an email from David: "Amelia, I heard about the acquisition. I wanted to congratulate you and apologize again for how things ended. You were right about everything, and I was wrong. I hope you can forgive my short-sightedness." I stared at the email for a long time before responding: "David, I appreciate the apology. I hope your next venture goes better." The most important lesson from this experience is that talented people aren't expenses to be minimized, they're assets to be invested in. His response was immediate: "Lesson learned. Best of luck with your new role." Looking back, I realized that getting fired from Dataflow was the best thing that could have happened to my career. It forced me to recognize my own worth and refuse to accept less than I deserved. It also taught me that the best revenge isn't always about destroying someone else, sometimes it's about building something better. 2 years later, I was speaking at a tech conference about talent retention and organizational culture. In the audience, I spotted several former Dataflow employees who joined other companies and were rebuilding their careers. During my presentation, I shared the Dataflow story without naming the company, focusing on the business lessons rather than the personal drama. When organizations undervalue their key contributors, I told the audience, they create unnecessary risks. The cost of replacing institutional knowledge almost always exceeds the cost of retaining it. After my talk, a young woman approached me. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with the eager but slightly overwhelmed expression I recognized from my own early career. "Ms. Chen, I'm dealing with a similar situation at my current company. I've been asking for a promotion for months, but they keep telling me I need more experience. Meanwhile, they're hiring external candidates for senior roles at salaries higher than what I'm requesting." I smiled, remembering my own frustration in similar circumstances. "What's your name?" "Rachel. I'm a software engineer at a fintech startup." "Rachel, let me ask you something. Do you believe you're being compensated fairly for your contributions?" She shook her head. "Not even close. I built their entire user authentication system, and I'm still classified as a junior developer." "Then you have a decision to make. You can continue accepting undervaluation, or you can take steps to ensure you're properly compensated for your skills." "But what if they won't budge on salary? What if they really can't afford to pay me what I'm worth?" I handed her my business card. "Then they can't afford to keep you. Rachel, the market will value your skills even if your current employer doesn't. Don't let anyone convince you to accept less than you deserve." 6 months later, I got an email from Rachel: "Ms. Chen, I wanted to thank you for your advice. I took a new position as a senior engineer at a different company, with a 40% salary increase and much better growth opportunities. My former employer tried to counteroffer when I gave notice, but by then it was too late. Thank you for helping me realize my worth." I smiled as I read her message. The cycle was continuing, talented people recognizing their value and refusing to accept less than they deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant: "Your 3 p.m. meeting is here. It's the CEO of TechFlow Industries. They want to discuss a potential acquisition of their recommendation engine team." I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room. Another company, another group of executives who'd probably undervalued their technical talent and were now dealing with the consequences. As I walked down the hallway, I reflected on how much had changed since that day in David's office when he told me people were replaceable. I'd learned that the opposite was true: the right people in the right roles, with the right support, are irreplaceable. Companies that understand this thrive. Companies that don't, well, they end up selling their assets to their former employees' new companies. I pushed open the conference room door, ready to hear another story of undervalued talent and organizational dysfunction. But this time, I was on the other side of the table, the one with the power to acquire distressed assets and integrate talented teams into a culture that actually valued their contributions. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I'd been an underpaid engineer begging for recognition. Now I was a CTO with the authority to acquire entire companies and their technical teams. "Good afternoon," I said to the TechFlow executives. "I understand you're interested in discussing your recommendation engine platform. Why don't you start by telling me about your current technical challenges?" As they began explaining their situation, talented engineers leaving, institutional knowledge gaps, declining system performance, I took notes and nodded sympathetically. I'd heard this story before. The difference was that this time, I was the one with the power to offer solutions. And I was very good at recognizing undervalued talent. After all, I'd been there myself. The data flow story became something of a legend in Seattle's tech community. Not because I destroyed a company out of spite, but because it illustrated a fundamental truth about the modern economy. In a knowledge-based industry, your most valuable assets walk out the door every evening. Smart companies invest in retaining those assets. They pay fair wages, provide growth opportunities, and create cultures where talented people want to stay and contribute. Companies that don't learn this lesson the easy way will eventually learn it the hard way. David learned it when Dataflow's stock price crashed. Richard learned it when he had to negotiate the sale of company assets. The investors learned it when their portfolios took a hit. But the most important lesson wasn't about corporate strategy or talent management. It was about self-worth and the courage to demand what you deserve. I'd spent 2 years accepting less than my market value because I was grateful for the opportunity and afraid of seeming ungrateful. I'd internalized the message that asking for fair compensation was somehow greedy or unprofessional. The truth is that advocating for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. If you don't value your own contributions, you can't expect others to value them either. My story had a happy ending because I eventually found the courage to recognize my worth and act on it. But the real victory wasn't in Dataflow's failure, it was in my success at Nexus, where I was valued, challenged, and compensated fairly from day one. Today, as I lead a team of brilliant engineers and help build cutting-edge technology, I make sure to remember the lessons from my Dataflow experience. I advocate for my team's compensation, I recognize their contributions publicly, and I create opportunities for their growth. Because I learned, sometimes the hard way, that people aren't replaceable. The right people in the right roles, with the right support, are the foundation of every successful organization. And that's a lesson worth remembering, whether you're a junior engineer asking for your first raise or a CEO making decisions about your company's most valuable assets. The algorithm David thought could be easily rewritten? It took Dataflow 18 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to replace it. They never succeeded. Some things, it turns out, really are irreplaceable. This story is a work of fiction, but the lessons are real. If you're a talented professional who feels undervalued, remember that the market will recognize your worth even if your current employer doesn't. Have the courage to advocate for yourself, and don't accept less than you deserve. The right opportunity is out there, sometimes you just need to be brave enough to find it.